In the space of just over 2 years, today's featured artist scored 12 top 10 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. That's insane, 12. And actually that list includes 5 number ones, and the lowest single really came in at number 7, so 12 top 7 singles. And as it just so happens, today we're covering that number 7 song. But what makes this story even more compelling is the fact that this artist hired the singer that he once replaced to sing on this track. And when I say replaced, I'm talking about fronting one of the biggest bands of the rock era. So you'd expect there to maybe be some bad blood. Find out if there was. This is definitely one of my favorite tracks from this artist. And honestly, I think it deserved a higher ranking than it got. Get ready. Story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember those magical times when you heard a song on the radio, you loved it, you went right out and bought the 45, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure that you subscribe below right now. Click the notification button so that you always know when our new stuff comes out. Interviews with the legends all the time. Check us out on Patreon as well. That helps us curate this channel, helps us do more interviews. We give you more content there. So today, we're turning the clock back to good old 1985, an era when Phil Collins was king of the radio dial, both with Genesis and as a solo artist. And that number 7 featured song that I was telling you about, it's Take Me Home from his third solo record, No Jacket Required. We'll have more on those 8 other top 7 hits coming up as well. So looking back at this time, 1985, Phil Collins admitted with some self-deprecating honesty that these were the years when he was everywhere all the time, monopolizing the airwaves, MTV, and the charts, even the bloody Oscars. He said in his book, which great autobiography, you got to check it out. He said, try as you might, you could not escape him when you turned on a TV or a radio. And then he continued with, if you take a charitable view, I simply write a lot of hits. If you take a pragmatic view, me and my music just won't give it a rest. Well said. Well played, Mr. Phil Collins. The 80s, when a guy that looked more like your uncle than an international pop star. Yeah, that's him, Uncle Phil Collins. He was everywhere in the 80s. He released 4 studio albums with Genesis and another 4 studio albums solo. When he wasn't topping the charts with singles and records, he was almost topping the charts with records and singles. Things really started ramping up in 1984 with the standalone single, Against All Odds, Take a Look at Me Now, parentheses song, and the duet, Easy Lover with Philip Bailey.
So take a look at me now. She's an easy lover.
And it would continue into the early 90s, if you really want to get technical. From 1984 to 1990, in a span of roughly 6.5 years, Phil Collins had 19 top 7 hits, both solo and with Genesis, with 8 going to number 1. I mean, that's approaching Beatles-like numbers. But the pop culture moment I want to focus in on comes in the middle of all this, with the highly successful back-to-back releases of No Jacket Required and Invisible Touch. Both reached number 1 on the Billboard album chart. So here's a question, trivia question I want to throw out there. Both these albums issued massive, multiple pop singles and sold a ton of records. Which one was bigger, No Jacket or Invisible Touch? Take a guess in the comments right now. See if you get it right at the end of the episode. No cheating. So I gotta ask, has anything like this ever happened in the history of the rock era? An artist who routinely bounces back and forth between a dominant solo career and a dominant band. No one else comes to mind, not like the power of Phil Collins. Now, when Phil dropped his number 1 classic, No Jacket Required, it blasted off into the stratosphere, putting the likes of Prince and Michael Jackson and Madonna on notice. Phil was at the top of his game at this moment. No Jacket Required, it debuted at number 1 in the UK, and would later spend 7 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Without giving away any numbers yet, I'll just say that No Jacket Required went on to become one of the top 50 best-selling albums of all time. Phil Collins actually chose the title for the record thanks to not one, but actually 2 real-life jacket-related incidents. Phil talked about both of these in his autobiography, Not Dead Yet. Again, great book. You need to read it. The first of these episodes was while he and his second wife, Jill, were on vacation in the American Virgin Islands. Phil said that they went out to eat at their hotel's open-air restaurant. While they were waiting to be seated, the maitre d', she informed Phil that he needed a jacket and, he couldn't be seated otherwise. Phil's response to this was, I haven't got a jacket, mate. I'm on holiday in the Caribbean. As Phil continued saying this, talking to her, there were a couple of fellow vacationers in front of him. And after the comment, the husband turned around, gave Phil a raised eyebrow, and jokingly said, jacket required. Phil would not forget that phrase. And not long after that, while he was on tour with former Led Zeppelin vocalist Robert Plant, the two were staying at the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago. So that night, Robert Plant was wearing a very loud check Willoware suit. And Phil was wearing a brand new leather jacket and jeans as he went to have a drink at the hotel bar. In Phil's words, the barman gravely informed, "Sir, you need a jacket." Deja vu. No doubt exasperated by this second incident, Phil said, "I am wearing a jacket." A proper jacket, sir," replied the bartender, "not leather." Here's what Phil said next in his book. "Percy Plant's dressed like Coco the Clown, but he's all right. I'm in a designer leather jacket, very modish, I'll have you know, and I'm lowering the tone here." Yeah, it all sounds a little backwards. So the idea of jackets required, that was starting to turn up everywhere in Phil's life, it seemed. He'd always hated stuffiness and, snobbery, so he called his album No Jacket Required. It was a way of firing back against societal convention, if you will. But the story doesn't end there. While Collins was out doing rounds of American talk shows, to promote the album back in the day, Phil repeatedly told the story about the Chicago hotel on both Letterman and Johnny Carson. After that, Phil got a letter from the manager of the Ambassador East asking that he stop going public about, in Phil's words, their daft dress codes. The letter also stated that Phil could come into the hotel bar anytime he wanted, wearing really anything he wanted. They just really wanted him to please stop with all the negative publicity. I guess they even sent him a jacket too. That was the other part of the story. Collins would also pose for publicity photographs in suit jackets that were too large for him to lampoon that whole debacle. Now, as to why Phil Collins has an orange face on the iconic album cover, well, let's pause before I give you that to mention our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses I always jam. Bottom line here, if you wear glasses, even if you need sunglasses or reading glasses, Zenni, it's just the only way to go. You can rock a complete pair of prescription glasses for up to 80% off regular retail prices. And if you buy at the link right up here on the info button or at our special link below, you'll get the special Professor of Rock deal. Check it out today. You design the glasses, they deliver them right to your door. Amazing. So, if you've ever wondered why Phil has an orange face on the album cover, or maybe a red face, Phil said that he wanted, get this, a hot, bothered look. That's what he said. That's because, in his words, it was a hot album, club-friendly, and pumped up. The beads of sweat on his forehead are part actual sweat and part glycerine. Phil also said, the songs and the sentiments are true, but the cover, I confess, needed just the slightest bit of fakery to make me look hot and bothered. Not sure why. I barely stood still for 3 years. No Jacket Required is filled with really artistic vision, superior musicianship, and melodic exuberance. It was the first Collins record to feature completely original songs, no covers here. In total, there were 4 singles: Sussudio, One More Night, Don't Lose My Number, and of course, Take Me Home. Take Me Home is the 10th and closing track on the original version of No Jacket Required. Actually, we said Hello Goodbye would turn up as the closer on the compact disc release later. They don't see the There are actually several versions of Take Me Home that exist, including the album version that comes in at almost 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 51 seconds. The single edit is 4 minutes, 37 seconds, and 8 minutes and 7 seconds of a remix version as well. In my opinion, Take Me Home is one of Phil Collins' best solo offerings. It's a song whose meaning to me was originally kind of vague. First listen, it appears to be about longing to return home. However, Collins has explained that the lyrics refer to a patient in a mental institution, waiting for the day of his release, because he can't remember a day outside of this place. It's actually based on the 1962 Ken Kesey novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a classic. Just real quick, Ken wrote the novel based on his experience working at a mental institution in California in the early 60s. The book itself takes place in an Oregon psychiatric hospital and is narrated by Chief Bromden, a giant but a gentle Native American patient. Bromden's story primarily follows the hijinks of Randall McMurphy, a rebellious and inadvertent leader among all the patients. Throughout the story, McMurphy faces off against the head administrative nurse, Nurse Ratched, who rules the ward with an iron fist and serves as the story's antagonist. Overall, it's a compelling study of the dangers associated with institutional processes, and really a fascinating probe into the human mind. If you're not familiar with the book's memorable conclusion, not going to spoil it for you here, but really the book is great. Of course, you got to check out the movie as well. You can definitely find multiple connections between Take Me Home and this acclaimed story. A couple of interesting things to point out about this particular track. First, Take Me Home starts with a driving drum loop from Collins' Roland TR-909 drum machine. Right there, already a flag goes up. Phil Collins, the drummer, one of the best of his generation, Mr. In the Air Tonight drum icon, prominently featuring a drum machine on one of his hits. A little surprising there. Second, Take Me Home also has a star-studded lineup of backup singers, including Sting, former Culture Club backing vocalist Helen Terry, and one Peter Gabriel. Yes, the man that Phil Collins actually replaced in Genesis. I've talked about this a little already in a couple of our Peter Gabriel episodes, but seeing these two legendary Genesis leads working together didn't surprise me at all at the time. I mean, Gabriel left on good terms at Genesis. He was just ready to strike out on his own, do his own thing, which does make for an interesting contrast to Phil Collins, who would have both a prominent solo career and then continue to front Genesis. But, there wasn't really any bad blood between the two of them. I think as bad as it got is when Sledgehammer actually replaced Invisible Touch at number 1 on the Hot 100. Sledgehammer. And you know what? Phil was tongue-in-cheek about it. I'm actually kidding. There was no bad blood. Collins didn't notice at the time that happened, but later when asked about it, he would say that if he had realized he'd been knocked off the top by his former bandmate, he would have sent Peter Gabriel a telegram saying something like, "Congratulations, bastard." I've said that before, but it's pretty funny. It's pretty cool that Peter and Phil were able to get on through the years, work on projects, both separate and together. I think ultimately the most defining, if not the most iconic part of this song is the hauntingly beautiful Take Me Home refrain. It's so good. Take Me Home, it's just a very soothing song. It's one that takes me back to a simpler time, for sure. In fact, every time I hear Take Me Home, it takes me back to this glorious afternoon where my dad was cooking giblets on the grill outside. He asked me to bring out the stereo so that we could play some music. He told me I could play anything I wanted. Now, I played Phil Collins because we both loved him. My dad first bought the record, No Jacket Required. I listened to it. I heard it in the background, loved every song, so I went out and bought the tape. We sat on the deck on that Saturday afternoon, I remember. My mom and my brothers and sisters, they were gone, but he grilled, We drank Pepsi. We talked about music. I mean, it may not sound like anything special, but it's one of my fondest memories. It's a memory that I turn back to all the time, especially since my dad passed away a few years back. I remember later when we went inside, we were flipping through the TV and the Take Me Home video was playing. That was cool. Speaking of which, although Take Me Home is about someone being locked up in an asylum, as we've discussed, the music video showcases something very different. It was filmed while Collins was on his No Jacket Required tour. The video features him visiting major cities across the world. There's New York, there's London, there's Paris, Tokyo, Sydney. I think Hollywood's in there. Even Graceland's in there. This, of course, led many listeners to misinterpret the original meaning of the lyrics. And because, in stark contrast, Phil is as free as can be, traveling all over the globe. So it's kind of confusing. Going home means something very different in this context. The last part of the video is very funny, though, in an 80s sort of way.
Sydney, New York, London.
You've been down at the pub, haven't you?
So Take Me Home reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100, like I said. It was the least successful of his No Jacket Required offerings, which anybody would kill for a number 7 hit in the 80s. It did peak at number 2 on the Billboard AC charts. It also went to number 12 on the Mainstream Rock Tracks chart. Internationally, it made it to 64 in Australia, 19 in UK, 13 in Ireland, and it went to number 2 in Canada. Take Me Home has also appeared in a few different movies and TV shows over the years, including Miami Vice, MacGyver, Mr. Robot. There aren't a lot of covers on record for Take Me Home, although both the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and the London Starlight Orchestra have done their own renditions. Now, in 2003, the group Bone Thugs-n-Harmony, they heavily sampled the song in their single Home, which many rappers have done with Phil Collins stuff. Big influence on hip-hop and rap. I guess Bone Thugs-n-Harmony liked the song so much that they contacted Phil personally. They asked his permission to sample it, and they even invited him to appear in the music video. However, Phil Collins, he actually declined. That was mainly, though, because Bone Thugs-n-Harmony were in America and Phil was in Geneva at the time. But the group really wanted Phil to be involved with this project, so they actually flew to Geneva to meet him. I guess Phil was so taken with their passion and their respect for him that he agreed to let him use the song's hook. He also appeared in their video as well. In the video, Phil Collins gives a very stoic performance, often sticking to the background. That is until Phil's massive chorus kicks into gear. Now, whether you're a fan of Bone Thugs-n-Harmony or not, I definitely recommend you checking it out. I like Bone Thugs-n-Harmony. I think they're cool. Phil's part actually creates this incredible contrast in the song. Very powerful and overall, really cool collaboration. So earlier, I asked which was the bigger album in the US, Phil Collins' No Jacket Required or Genesis' Invisible Touch. Let's take a closer look. Let's break down a few of the numbers, starting with how the singles did. No Jacket Required released 4 singles, with both Sussudio and One More Night taking the number 1 spot. Don't Lose My Number, that came in at number 4. And as I've already mentioned, Take Me Home topped out at number 7. So together, these 4 singles averaged a 3.25 spot on the Hot 100. Those are the kind of chart numbers that most musicians only dream of. Meanwhile, on the Genesis side of the equation, Invisible Touch released 5 singles, with the title track being the only number 1 off the album. Then there was Into Deep and Tonight, Tonight, Tonight that both came in at number 3.
This, you know I want to, but I'm in too deep. Tonight, tonight, tonight.
And then finally Land of Confusion and Throwing It All Away each reached number 4. Gosh, such great songs.
Tell me why this is a land of confusion. Throw it all away.
So altogether, the singles on Invisible Touch averaged out to a number 3 spot exactly. Slightly higher than No Jacket Required. Real close there. I mean, it looks like Genesis 86 just barely edges out Solo Collins 85, if you will. In terms of single average anyway. Although I guess you could argue that No Jacket Required produced 2 number 1s in 4 tries and Invisible Touch had 1 in 5. So maybe a toss-up there. Sorry, I'm a chart geek. So maybe the number of albums sold is the determining factor. So let's take a look at that. No Jacket Required is reported to have sold over 12 million copies in the United States and more than 25 million worldwide. Remember when I said it was a top 50 album sold? Well, compare that to Invisible Touch, which sold 6 million copies in the US, half of what No Jacket Required did. But estimates suggest that globally, its sales surpassed 21 million copies, which is pretty close to No Jacket. I mean, 25 and 21 million. The guy was behind both of them. It's just incredible. Rarefied territory here. So I guess there's room for debate. Tell me which album do you think was bigger or better in the comments below. I'm just going to say that either way, it was pretty good to be Phil Collins in the 1980s. Final thought, if you combine the stats from these 2 albums, that's almost 50 million units sold and 9 top 7 singles between them. And although Take Me Home is bringing up the rear at number 7, let's be honest. Among all these Phil Collins inspired hits, I would not for 1 second call Take Me Home the least of them. Definitely one of my personal favorites from Phil's catalog. I gotta say, Phil Collins is one of my favorites ever. Always been a favorite of mine. You know, not only because he was a bona fide hit-making machine. He was so melodic. His stuff was so great. It just stuck with you. But because he did it without the movie star looks and without the slick trickery. He made it look easy. He gave hope to all of us underdogs. Like he says in the lyrics of Take Me Home, I'm an ordinary man. Touche, Phil. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Uncle Phil Collins and Take Me Home and about his solo versus, Phil solo versus Genesis. Tell us what you think. What are your memories of the song? What do you think are his best offerings in the 80s? Again, better with Genesis or better solo? I tell you, it's just incredible what he was able to do in that 2 years. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe below. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.